Welcome to the Your Take podcast, giving passionate, everyday basketball fans the opportunity to share their takes on classic and current debates from around the NBA. Compete head-to-head and get your voice heard with the hopes of our listeners crowning you the debate champion. Who's the GOAT? Would you rather build around Luka or Zion? Who's your 2019-2020 MVP? Listen to fans just like you debate these topics and more on the Your Take podcast. Welcome on in to episode 1 of the Your Take podcast. I'm your host, Ben Stern, and today we'll be debating who had the better career, Mr. Fundamental Tim Duncan or the Mamba Kobe Bryant. Now, before we get into our debate, I'm just going to introduce myself as well as the podcast. I just graduated in May from Indiana University in Bloomington. However, I'm originally from Philadelphia, so I'm a die-hard Sixers fan. Now let's get into what is your take and what is the goal of this podcast. Now, sports debates are a huge pastime in America. I have them all the time with my friends, with my family. There are entire TV shows, such as First Take and Undisputed, dedicated solely to hearing the most recent debates and whatever the hottest debates are going on right now, to hear them from Stephen A., from Skip Bayless. We've heard all their names. So the point of Your Take is to give regular, everyday fans the opportunity to come on, share their hot takes, their hot debates, their hot opinions on the most recent topics. If you've ever wanted the opportunity to debate sports to a larger audience, Your Take is the show for you. And now that we've talked about what Your Take is, let's get into our debate. So like I said before, we are debating who had the better career, Tim Duncan or Kobe Bryant. To give a little bit of background, both players are 5-time NBA champions. They both have won multiple finals MVPs. They both played their entire careers for the same franchises, the Lakers and Spurs respectively. They're both arguably the best player to ever wear their team's uniforms. And they both got inducted into the 2020 Hall of Fame class together just this past year. So before we get into the debate, let's introduce our debaters, starting with Ben Ekdahl.
Hey, what's up, guys? Like Ben said, I just graduated from IU too, as well, May 2020. And I am originally from Indiana, born and raised. And I'm a huge Pacers fan, which means I absolutely hate the 76ers. And other than that, I am an avid competitive biker. Back to you, Bench.
And now, kicking off our second debater, David Gordon.
What's up, guys? From Lower Merion, Pennsylvania. Guess that makes me a bit of a homer when it comes to Kobe. And I'm also, like Benj, a big Sixers fans. And, I'm indifferent to the Pacers. They like to hate on us, but I don't really have a problem with them.
You're full of shit.
They just seem to have a rivalry with us that's just non-existent.
Well, we'll see when the playoffs come around in August. So let's get into our debate. Ben won the coin toss, elected to go second. So, David, why don't you kick us off? Tell us why the Mamba Kobe Bryant had a better career than Tim Duncan.
So there are two main reasons why I believe Kobe Bryant had a better career than Tim Duncan. The first is that Kobe had to overcome far more adversity to achieve 5 championships than Duncan. And the second is that Kobe, with all due respect to Tim Duncan, who I believe is the greatest power forward of all time, left behind a legacy not only greater than Tim Duncan, but arguably greater than any NBA player of all time. Starting out with adversity. After winning his first 3 titles with Shaq and company, Kobe saw plenty of players come and go. He was forced to carry the load for teams where his best supporting cast member was Kwame Brown. For years, the Lakers went through ups and downs. Management changed, coaches changed. No players which were brought in or drafted seemed to be able to contribute. It was only after the Lakers managed to trade for Pau Gasol that the team was finally able to win 2 additional titles. Kobe was finally able to prove to the rest of the NBA that he was truly capable of being the man on a championship team. Duncan, on the other hand, had way more stability with the Spurs. Spurs are an organization that portrayed near perfection through a 20-year period from the late 90s to the early 2010s. Duncan played for the same coach, the same system throughout his entire NBA career. The coach never changed. The front office never changed. The extraordinary amount of talent around him never changed. Duncan won his first title with David Robinson in 1999. Following this, the Spurs surrounded Duncan with superstar talent like Manu Ginobili, Tony Parker, and Bruce Bowen. Without these 3, Duncan would have never come close to winning another ring. These 4 ran through the Western Conference for nearly a decade, capturing 3 additional titles. It is also worth mentioning that the Spurs added Robert Horry for those 3 title runs. Once the core 3 of Duncan, Manu, and Parker had reached the end of their primes, the Spurs reloaded with Kawhi Leonard and Danny Green. Consistency defined by the Spurs' ability to surround their man with exceptional talent to win titles. If you put Kobe in Duncan's shoes, who wins more titles? In my opinion, Kobe at least wins 6, possibly more. Moving on to the legacy. Statistics aside, Kobe has left behind a legacy that is untouched by any player in his generation. His work ethic, motivation to never settle and never quit is why he will be remembered as one of the greatest of all time. He'd be the first to tell you that he's still pained by the fact he couldn't win 6 rings like Michael or even more. He refused to settle for anything other than perfection. His tenacity and will has been replicated in pickup games by kids around the world. When you were growing up, there was only one person you wanted to be on the court, Kobe. When you hit a fadeaway, there was only one name you would shout out, Kobe. When you woke up early in the morning to take a few shots before school, there was only one player you were thinking about, Kobe. With all due respect to Tim Duncan, no one grew up wanting to be like him. Everyone wanted to be like Kobe.
All right, David, thank you. Now let's pass it off. Ben, tell me why Tim Duncan is better than Kobe.
Bro, if Kobe strove for perfection like that, he wouldn't have gone 34 and 48 in the 04-05 season. But anyway, talking about Tim Duncan, one of the hot debates, and I'm sure that at some point Benj will have this debate topic as well, is the Mount Rushmore of everybody's all-time NBA players. Now, clearly, LeBron, MJ, and Kareem belong on that list. There's no doubt about that.
I agree.
If you think Kobe undoubtedly belongs on that, you're just a fucking homer. Anyway, in my opinion, Tim Duncan is the 4th player on that list. I think when you look at it and look at his accomplishments throughout his career, his consistency, he is the 4th greatest player of all time. Not Magic Johnson, not Larry Bird. Fuck Larry Bird. Not anybody else. Tim Duncan is by far the 4th greatest player of all time. And when comparing him with Kobe, which shouldn't even be debate in my opinion, but here we are, they have the same number of NBA championship rings. Tim Duncan did win more finals MVPs, 3-2, and he probably should have won 4. But Kobe definitely did not deserve more than 2, possibly less. I don't know. I think Pau Gasol was great, but that's irrelevant. Anyway, he also won more MVPs, 2-1. And he was on more all-defensive teams than Kobe, 15-12. He was actually on more all-defensive teams than any other player in NBA history. And now a lot of people like to talk about the stability that Tim Duncan had during his career. Players like Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili come up, Kawhi Leonard as well later on in his career. And then, of course, Pop, one of the greatest coaches of all time. But at the same time, Kobe was playing with star players too. He was playing with Shaq, Gasol. He fucked up Dwight Howard's career, and he played with Lamar Odom, who was a fantastic basketball player until he became a drug addict. Anyway, Kobe had the exact same consistency with Phil Jackson that Tim Duncan did with Pop. There's no doubt about that. And oftentimes people will make the argument, hey, LeBron had to go to the Heat, or hey, LeBron had to bring Anthony Davis in to compete. And the same thing with Kobe. Kobe wouldn't have won a single ring without Pau Gasol or Shaquille O'Neal. Now, when has anybody ever said Tim Duncan needed somebody brought in? Back to you, Benj.
All right, guys. Thank you for the introduction. You guys both have really hot takes, hot opinions. One of you guys want to start off? Defend your take. David, I think a lot of shots were taken at you during this. Do you have anything you want to say first?
Yeah, I have some things I want to clear up for a second. So, specifically talking about the 2 players' primes, I don't really think it's comparable at all. The way that Kobe was forced to carry many of his Lakers teams, specifically in the mid to late 2000s, is far better than anything Duncan had to do in the regular season or in the postseason.
David, let me ask you a question. So you said that Kobe was carrying those teams in the middle 2000s. What was he carrying to?
Yeah.
There were 3 years between when Shaq left and when Pau Gasol came. They missed the playoffs 1 year. The other 2 years they got eliminated in the first round. Some would say it was Russell Westbrook-esque. They put up. There are 2 players who take a ton of shots. They need to have the ball in their hands. They try so hard on defense, but as soon as KD for Russ or Shaq for Kobe leaves the team, they suddenly can't make it out of the first round of the playoffs anymore.
With all due respect to Russell Westbrook, Kobe Bryant would have never lost in the first round of the playoffs if he had Paul George or Victor Oladipo.
I'm saying that's my point. Russell Westbrook, KD left. Also, the Russell Westbrook the last 2 years lost in the first round of the playoffs with Paul George, And then even
Yes.
without Paul George, didn't get out of the first round. But I digress. Go back to your point. What are you saying about Kobe?
So I'm just saying, like, when you look at the player, when you look at his prime from the mid 2000s after Shaq left to when he won his final 2 titles, the way that Kobe was scoring the bar for the Lakers was Jordan-esque. So from 2000 to 2013, Bryant averaged 27.8 points per game while leading the Lakers in a very, very difficult Western Conference with no true number one option until they acquired Pau Gasol from the Grizzlies in 2008, and they were eventually able to win 2 titles. But you still look at those teams, and you look at the supporting cast of obviously Gasol, Odom, Ariza, Fisher, Bynum. Those guys aren't jokes, but you're not looking at those guys and being like, wow, like those are like superstar caliber players that are going to, really surround Kobe with the scoring and the defense that they need in order to win a championship.
Jesus
Unlike
Christ.
Duncan, which had consistent talent, consistent reliability throughout his entire career.
Ekdal?
So I disagree in so many ways. First of all, back to Benja's point, Kobe sucked on his own when he was a lone star on that team. Tim Duncan, when he won his first championship, he really was, in 03, he really was the lone star on that team. At the time, Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker had just come to the league and hadn't even come close to establishing themselves. And David Robinson was old as shit. He was barely doing anything. I think he was averaging 10 points a game. So when you compare the two's teammates, honestly, I think that Kobe had better teammates during his career, during his successful years when his teams actually won championships, not when they were shitting the bed. He had better teammates. Shaq, Gasol, and Odom are all far better. Not Odom, sorry. Shaq, Gasol, and Dwight Howard, are all better than any player that Tim Duncan ever played with. When you look at Tony Parker and Manu Ginobili, especially Manu Ginobili, neither of those players would be the Hall of Fame candidates that they are if they weren't foreign. They really helped to make the NBA an international game. And that's a big reason why they're going to be in the Hall of Fame one day. But Tim Duncan, in all reality, didn't have any better of a situation than Kobe Bryant did, except for those 3 years that you mentioned when Kobe shit the bed.
And just to add on to that real quick, between 1998 and 2015, if you take out Tim Duncan and Kobe Bryant, the Lakers had 6 different players who were all-stars, and those 6 players made 13 all-star appearances. You look at the Spurs, only 3 Spurs players made all-star appearances in that same span, and only had 11 total all-star appearances. So Kobe played with more all-stars and players that made more all-star appearances than Tim Duncan did. David, what do you think about that? All your arguments you're making, they're throwing right back at you right now.
So, what years did you say that was from?
From 1998 to 2015.
Okay. I first want to touch on Dwight Howard very quickly. I don't really think that's at the very end of Kobe's career. I don't think anybody's going to make a point where, oh, wow, he had Dwight Howard on his team. They should have won a title. Like, Dwight Howard, I don't need to get into him too much, but that's just a ridiculous statement by Ekdal. The second thing is that I feel
But go ahead.
I just think that when you look at the team that Kobe took, we're putting the Shaq team aside. Shaq was the most dominant player on the team in the league at the time they won their first 3 titles.
But yeah, Kobe sucked during those times. But yeah,
I mean, he didn't suck, but maybe
the first championship.
Maybe the first championship, but after that, he was a pretty dominant player. But you look at the last 2 titles that he won with Gasol and Gasol and company. You're not looking at a team that today people would pick to win a championship, because nowadays you got all these super teams running around, and when you look at like a team like the Spurs at the time, the mid 2000s, and they won 3 titles, like you're looking at a team that has some of the best talent in the league at the time versus Kobe's last 2 championships. So that's the main comparison I want to make.
Ben?
So when I look at Kobe's last 2 championships, I completely agree he was the best player on that team, right? And there's no doubting that Shaq was the best player on those first 3 championship teams. And I think the amount of rings that Kobe won contributes way too much to his legacy, especially among Kobe fans. And I think in reality, without Shaq, he would have only won 2 championships. I don't think he would have won a single championship in the early 2000s. And frankly, I think the teams that the Lakers would have put out there would have been completely pathetic.
Not arguing.
Without Shaq coming, Kobe Bryant wouldn't have become the player that he is today, that he is known for being today. He wouldn't have left the same legacy without Shaq. But on the other side of things, you have Tim Duncan, Tony Parker, Manu Ginobili, Kawhi Leonard, and Pop wouldn't have the legacies they have today without Tim Duncan. And I think you can say that more so with them than you can say vice versa when it comes to Tim Duncan's legacy and how they impacted his legacy. He had a bigger impact on their legacies than they did on his.
All right. Well, I can play the hypothetical game too. If you switched Kobe and Duncan, you think Duncan wins those last?
You started out with the hypotheticals. You brought up the hypotheticals. You're talking about switching their places. No, I mean, who would have been the big man on those Spurs teams then? Who would have been in the paint? Tim Duncan's arguably one of the greatest defensive players of all time. Kobe Bryant, you cannot say the same for him. Just because he tried hard on the perimeter doesn't mean he was an elite defender.
And he had more first-team all-defenses, I believe, than Tim Duncan did.
Yeah, because he created a perception that he was a good defender, when in all reality, if you look at advanced statistics, that's just not even close to being true. Tim Duncan was far and away a better defensive player. And he, like I said, he is the second all-time defender in terms of win shares, defensive win shares, and he is the only player in NBA history. LeBron didn't do it. Michael didn't do it. Kobe sure as hell didn't do it, with over 100 offensive and over 100 defensive win shares.
You don't think any of those
far more efficient?
You don't think any of those win shares have to do with the fact that he played on a team that was probably one of the better defensive teams in the last 20 years, that had fantastic talent around him, that was helping him out all the time, that kind of allowed him to, lay back and take his chances on the offensive end as well, and defensively. So he didn't have to worry about running around and doing a lot of different stuff that, Kobe Bryant was having to worry about.
On what planet is Tony Parker or Manu Ginobili a good defensive player? Kawhi Leonard, sure, but Kawhi Leonard was 22 years old. I get it. He played well defensively against LeBron. I get that. That's one championship when Tim Duncan wasn't the best player on his team. He was still the best player on his team for the previous 4. Kobe wasn't even comparable to Shaq for their first 3 rings. Not even comparable. They weren't even close to being on the same level. Shaq was far and away the better player.
So you look at Kobe Bryant's peak, and I think it was one of the most impressive 4 or 5 year stretches that we've seen in our lifetime. Starting with 05-06, Kobe wins his first scoring title, averaging over 35 points a game, which was the best at the time since Michael Jordan had done it in the 90s. He then averaged over 31 the next year in 06-07 to win another scoring title. Finally, Pau Gasol joined the team. And what did we see after Pau Gasol joined the team? They won two championships in a row. Kobe won Finals MVP for both of those. And from 07 to 2011, the Lakers won 57 games or more for 4 straight seasons. And Kobe also won an MVP on top of that and finished second in MVP another year.
Yeah, it's possibly the best peak other than Michael Jordan, and possibly what we've seen out of Steph Curry and LeBron James.
So here's the issue I have with you bringing that up, okay? So you talk about his scoring and his MVP season and averaging 35 points a game, stuff like that, when his team was complete ass. They got bounced in the first round of the Western Conference final, of the Western Conference playoffs, of the NBA playoffs. His team got bounced. How is that any different than Russell Westbrook averaging a triple-double and then winning MVP and then getting bounced in the first round as well? How is that any different?
Well, what about the 3 year stretch where they went to 3 straight finals, won two championships. Kobe got 2 Finals MVPs. We kind of talked about that.
But how can you coincide both of those eras? How can you coincide both of those?
I think you're making a very valid argument, but Kobe was able to prove eventually that once you gave him a number 2 option, not a fantastic number 2 option, but a very solid number 2 option, and Pau Gasol, he went on to win 2 additional championships. And if you look at Tim Duncan's peak, like, he never had to carry the load scoring-wise for the Spurs. He never had to carry the load offensively for them. He was able to dish the ball. Other players are able to create looks for him, and he was able to create looks for other people. Like, it's a very team-oriented game over the Spurs. If you look at a guy like Kobe Bryant, he had to carry the load even in his championship years on the offensive.
No, that was prime Pau Gasol. Pau Gasol was an incredible player. argue one of the greatest foreign players of all time, and I would argue a top 50 player of all time. He was incredible, and he was better during his prime years when they won those championships than any player Tim Duncan ever played with.
That's not true. I mean that's just a terrible statement. You can't say that.
When Pau Gasol
who was better than Pau Gasol? Who was better than Pau Gasol?
There's two players that Pau Gasol that have played with Tim Duncan. Off the bat, you have David Robinson and Kawhi Leonard.
David Robinson was old as shit, and Kawhi Leonard he's not the Kawhi that he is today. There's no doubting that.
I mean, they would not have won that. They would not have won the last finals if Tim Duncan.
David, let's look at Duncan's peak. Let's look at Duncan's peak too, because it's also pretty impressive. We got the back-to-back MVPs from 2000, 2002, 2003, and the 2003 MVP specifically is arguably one of the greatest seasons a player has ever had in NBA history. Duncan won MVP. The Spurs won the finals. Duncan won Finals MVP. The team had 60 wins. He finished 4th in Defensive Player of the Year. He was first team all defense. If you look at the stats, he averaged 23.3 points, 12.9 rebounds, 3.9 assists, 2.9 blocks. There was only one player in NBA history who has had a season like that, and it was Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. So I think Kobe's peak might have been a little bit longer, maybe a few more years, but Duncan's one season, back-to-back MVPs, and specifically the second MVP, is arguably one of the greatest seasons an individual has ever had.
Yeah, so like you said, Tim Duncan in those 2003 finals, Tim Duncan, he averaged 24 points a game, 17 rebounds a game, 5 assists a game, and 5 blocks a game. So you're telling me he never had to carry the load offensively, especially as a big man like that? 24 points a game, by far the leading scorer, 10 more points than any other player on that team. And he was incredibly efficient doing it.
That was against the Pistons, correct?
Yeah, 03 was against the Pistons.
Okay. Just wanted to I mean, yeah, that's my main point. You're talking about a Pistons team's fantastic
03 was against the Nets. 03 was
against the Nets. Okay, yeah. Not the strongest Nets team in the world.
I mean, Kenyon Martin was a pretty good defensive player. He was very physical down low. He definitely would have been a great matchup with Tim Duncan, but Tim Duncan just completely dominated him.
He's the greatest power forward of all time. I'm not disagreeing that he was a fantastic player.
And he is greater than Kobe Bryant. If you look at the numbers, just purely the numbers, throw the legacy out. I get it. There's a big man bias. There's a bias against big men because nobody wants to be that guy who's doing the dirty work down in the paint. Everybody wants to be that guy. Everybody wants to be that guy who's shooting from the perimeter, flinging up shots, throwing up crazy shots, as even if they're crazy inefficient, like Kobe's shots were.
Let's talk about playoffs real quick. So again, it's pretty hard to compare the Lakers versus the Spurs in the playoffs because obviously Kobe played with Shaq for those few years, and there was only one series, Kobe versus Duncan, after Shaq had left the Lakers, which the Lakers did win 4-1. However, when you look at the numbers themselves, Tim Duncan's playoff PER and true shooting percentage are higher than higher career averages than Kobe's. Furthermore, Duncan's true shooting percentage is higher in finals games and winner-go-home finals games compared to Kobe Bryant. So we talk about Kobe Bryant has all those shots. Everyone yells Kobe like all the time when they're shooting. But at the end of the day, Duncan had the better shooting numbers, and he seemed to be more clutch in those finals moments than Kobe was.
If you are an efficiency nerd who sat on the bench and wrote down the stats for your high school basketball teams, then you will prefer Tim Duncan. If you understand how basketball works and the grind and the tenacity it takes to be a champion, then you will agree that Kobe Bryant is the better player.
That's like saying, Kobe wanted it more, huh? Did Kobe want it more?
Better, David?
Did Kobe want championships more than Tim Duncan did? Did Kobe want to win more than Tim Duncan did?
All right, let's get to our closing arguments here. So, David, why don't you start us off here? For the last time, tell us why Kobe Bryant had the better career than Tim Duncan.
I think when you take into the account the struggle that Kobe had to go through in order to achieve 5 championships, I don't want to talk about the first 3. I understand that Shaq was a better player on those teams, most dominant big man during that era. But you look at what Kobe had to go through, what he had to endure in order to capture an additional 2 titles, far surpasses anything that he's throughout his entire career.
All right, Ben, take us home.
Tim Duncan.
Why is Duncan better?
Tim Duncan may have been the most consistently great player of all time. For those 19 years that he was in the NBA, he was incredibly dominant. His teams never missed the playoffs. And he won more than 50 games, except for the one season when they actually only played 50 games because of the lockout. So when you look at it from an overall perspective, during Tim Duncan's prime years, he was better than Kobe's prime years. He won 2 MVPs to Kobe's 1 MVP. He has more finals MVPs. All the stats are in Tim Duncan's corner. When you look at it blindly and not think about your own personal bias, when you look at the numbers, when you look at the stats, not who shot the ball from the perimeter versus the guy who was getting gritty in the paint, Tim Duncan is far and away a better player than Kobe Bryant.
All right, thank you guys for the great debate. Fans, listeners, now it is your turn. The tables are shifting a little bit. Make sure you go on Instagram. You will see a poll for who do you think had the better debate. If your entire life you've been arguing and saying that Kobe Bryant is better than Tim Duncan, I don't want you to vote for what your personal opinion is. I want you to vote for which debater you think made their case the best and made the best argument as to who had the better career between Tim Duncan or Kobe Bryant. So make sure to look on Instagram at YourTakePod for that poll coming shortly. And now, if you've made it this far through the entire debate, there are 3 more ways I would like for you guys to get involved with your take. First of all, if you really enjoy listening to basketball debates all the time, please listen and tell your friends to listen as well. Secondly, you can find us on all kinds of social media accounts. We're at YourTakePod on Instagram and on Twitter, Your Take Podcast on Facebook and on YouTube. Please like, comment, share, subscribe, repost, everything in order to help us continue to get our voice out there and spread the word that Your Take is the new and best up-and-coming basketball podcast. Finally, if you want an opportunity to come on the show, get your voice heard, share your hot takes and your hot debates, we'll be posting on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook some of our upcoming debate questions. What we want you to do is go comment. Give us 1 or 2 sentences about what your opinion is, the ones with the most likes, the ones that we think are the most interesting. I will DM you, I'll message you personally and give you the opportunity to come on the podcast and debate your takes just like Ben and David did today. So thank you guys so much for a great episode 1. We heard a rousing debate about who had the better career, Tim Duncan or Kobe Bryant. And we're looking forward to seeing future episodes and future takes coming soon. Have a good night.